This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next announcement. This is All India Radio. In the national program of talks tonight, we bring to you a discussion entitled Milestone 75. The participants are Dr. Manish Dabhade, Assistant Professor, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi; Mayank Singh, Defence Correspondent; Dr. Harsh Pathak, Advocate, Supreme Court of India. Senior journalist Aarti Tickoo Singh initiates and moderates the discussion.
Welcome to this special discussion on 75th milestone on India's independence. I want to begin this discussion with what Prime Minister Modi said about independence and the years and the quarter ahead of us. India ahead is going to be a new India. His vision seemed to be focused on self-reliance, which he has rightly sloganed as Atmanirbharta. I want to begin with Professor Dabhade, and I want to know what is India's place today in 2021 after 74 years of independence. We became an independent nation with a lot of colonial baggage. We had several challenges ahead of us. We had poverty. We had institutions which were still in its infancy when the British left. Where are we today in 2021?
When India became free in 1947, one of the singular question mark before the entire world was whether India will survive as a nation. I think that was really the starting point that the whole India project was questioned in many ways, and we have proved all those naysayers wrong. We have proved all those predictions entirely wrong, and obviously this also came in the backdrop of the partition, which really was seen as one of the very serious challenges to the idea of India. So I think from there in 47 to 2021 now, as a basic starting point, we survived successfully all those challenges and have moved from actually talking about a post-colonial state in terms of its identity, in terms of the challenges, to a very confident nation now, talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat in the widest possible sense, as Prime Minister Modi talked about in his Independence Day address on August 15th.
Would you agree with that assessment, Dr. Harsh Pathak, that we today are a very confident nation? And would you agree that constitutionally and legally, India today is a very strong, substantial state?
I would like to give the answer in affirmative to that, because if we see the India's ranking in terms of rule of law positions in all the countries which are in the United Nations, the way we progressed between 1947 till 1990, till the time the globalization and liberalization is coming up, and we have understood that the UN conventions are also very important to brought into for a good governance and socio-economic political justice. And if we see the numbers in the ranking, we have climbed post 1990 till 2015 or 19, if we can talk about. The rate to which we have improved in the rule of law position and the perception of the country, India, as for the investment for the international community, because international relations and perspective of a country is all about economics. So the basic foundation remain on economics, the investment, the way the people have started looking at India, the kind of new laws we have, post-liberalization, the way we have improved in terms of governance, rule of law positions. So there is a change in perception, and global perception has changed. We have come really so far if comparing the other democracies in the world, considering the kind of diversity we have, and the kind of numbers now we have, the where we have reached and what kind of perception we see in terms of rule of law and the safety and security of the investment of the other countries. I can very confidently say that there are few areas where still we need to be worked, but last 75 years are glorious for this country, and the way the things have changed in the 21st century are remarkable, and next 25 years are going to be more defining moment for this country.
Mr. Singh, you've been writing on defense. As Dr. Pathak was saying, economics drives a nation. Economics drives a society. Where do you place defense in that system? Where do you think we as a country are in terms of defense? Because just last year, in 2020, India had a standoff with China on line of actual control. One perception was that India lost some strategic strength in Ladakh. The other perception was that India stood its ground. It challenged People's Liberation Army, which is the army of China. And it was not like 1962 war in which India took a massive beating from the Chinese. Would you agree with that? And where do you see this country going in terms of its defense?
I would like to start with a point. Whenever a political dispensation takes a decision about a strategic move, that's the biggest thing which our army expects. So you did surgical strike and that was announced by your political dispensation. That was the biggest change which could come. The other thing, when you specifically talked about China, ethics is something which India has always been known about. Since 1995 till date, whatever the agreements were, if China was supposed to breach them, break them, MOUs and all, and they did what they did in May 2020, it was breach of that ethics, those agreements and those MOUs. Not only that, disengagement started in Feb, in May again. Now again you are seeing that Gogra is something wherein we have disengaged. So China, if it was expecting that we'll be chickening out, also China is now knowing that India is holding itself in so many ways, not here only, but in terms of trade, in terms of Indian Ocean regime. These things are happening quite well. The other part which we need to understand is that the changes which have happened in the armed forces, in terms of training, in terms of structure, in terms of configurations, India is changing itself. There's a concept which I would like to name here. It is called IBGization, integrated battle groups which are being formed. It will make the army leaner, meaner, with a massive power to move, with a massive explosive capacity. These patterns will be depending upon the terrain, upon the geography, and upon the operations. When we got independence, we were almost more than 4 lakh army, and today we are 1.4 million strong armed forces, which is Army, Navy and Air Force. So lots of things have changed to the extent all the developed nations, they wish, they try and come. We are holding lots of multilateral, bilateral exercises to hone up their skills because they want to learn the professionalism, the kind of art of war which we use. So it has been a massive change from the army which was in 1947 and now.
I will go back to Professor Dabhade. I'm going to ask you, in the last 74 years, India has had initially for a longest time identified itself as a country which was non-aligned. But everybody knew that we were closer to Soviet Union, at least till the end of the Cold War, when finally USA, America, became as the superpower of the world, and with the disintegration of Soviet Union. And since then, we have seen that India has tried to get closer to America. Today, we are strategic partners with America. We are strategic partners also with Israel. In the last 74 years, where do you think India's foreign policy has been going? And where do you think its friends and allies are today? Who are its enemies or who are frenemies? Because there is a concept where you have friends who act like enemies and there are enemies who act like friends. Can you, for our audience, map India's position on the globe geopolitically?
Looking back at last 74 years, all these years, successive prime ministers have shaped their foreign policy based on primarily where India was located geographically. Number two, its history. And number three was obviously the rapidly changing geopolitical scenario. So, for example, in the early 50s, it was really about the Cold War and how India was trying to protect its strategic autonomy in multiple ways. And that obviously, since Cold War was knocking at our doors through Pakistan, but also with China, so India tried to befriend Soviet Union for pure realpolitik reasons. In fact, just a few days ago, we remembered the 50th anniversary of the Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty. In fact, that was really a high mark for India's foreign policy, where India successfully fended off US with its aircraft carrier in the Bay of Bengal waters, and you also had the Pakistan with the Americans, and also China because of the 62 war in a very adversarial position. So despite all of that, India came out successfully breaking up of East Pakistan and supporting the liberation of Bangladesh. So I think that was definitely a very high point and shows how Indian leaders have largely and consistently shaped India's strategy in a very successful way. Fast forwarding to 1991, obviously with the loss of Soviet Union, India really lost its diplomatic sort of partner. But as you pointed out, the emergence of US as the sole superpower. So India was very clear from day one that the Americans are going to be very central to India's development initiatives, obviously with the post 1991 economic reforms. And you would remember that we all talk about close friendship between India and the US now, but it was in 1998 actually that you saw a complete transformation of India after the Pokhran 2 nuclear test. And in fact, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, then Prime Minister, was the one who first coined the term natural allies for India and US, cemented by, in fact, the nuclear deal of 2005 2008. And now we see in our geopolitical struggle, competition with China, US and India have joined hands in Quad. So that is largely the picture that now India is firmly looking at the geopolitical challenges. So and that's exactly what Prime Minister Modi also talked about on 15th of August. There are twin challenges: Atankvad, terrorism, and Vistarvad. So Chinese expansionism, and India is firmly with a group of like-minded democracies, and obviously is now part of the Quad, which is so central to managing the geopolitical challenge of China.
Very well put, Professor Dabhade. While he's pointed out the turning points or the biggest milestones through last 74 years of our independence, like 1971 when India was instrumental in liberating Bangladesh from the hold of Pakistan. That is one, and of course our nuclear tests, again a milestone. Another milestone was, of course, India getting closer to the US. From my perspective, Dr. Pathak, along with all these milestones was the constitutional milestone that this government, the Modi government, accomplished. And that was the nullification of Article 370 and 35A with respect to Jammu and Kashmir, reorganization of the state. Apart from several other constitutional reforms that have taken place in the last 74 years. Would you agree with that? And would you also, for the sake of our audience, tell us what constitutional reforms can be listed as milestones in India's history?
Let's first look at the 370 because it's something which is very much in the news and everyone is quite tangible about this topic. I will speak with the license of being a lawyer and as much as we understand with the court of law and the process which is there in the constitution. Whether whatever has happened, it has been done within the federal structure which has to be maintained by the government, number one. Whether the government is competent to take an abolition of 370, it's a very straightforward answer. There are various multiple perspectives we have which may have different colors, different experiences. But the basics, if we test the decision when it was standard before the honorable courts as well, that we have got a very clear-cut Article 245 where the subjects are divided. The subjects which are concerned of the unity of the country and of the topics which affects the sentiment and life of the country, then Parliament is empowered. And within that framework, if a decision is taken, of course, being a progressive democracy, having an independent judicial system, separation of powers between executives, legislatives and judiciary, so those decisions can be tested upon. But prima facie, whether the person who has taken a decision is competent and what is the conscience of taking, what is the reason behind it. If we test only being neutral to the political and the sentiments which are there, we don't deny, we don't disagree with that. But yes, the Parliament was competent to take up this decision and to take it the way they have decided for the better governance. So it falls very much in the four corners of the constitutional system and considering the overall security, peace and concern of the country. I'm coming to the second question, that what are the major reforms which we see in last 75 years? And then I'll come to the point what we have seen with this present government regime. I think once we talk about the Right to Information Act, the way it has empowered the citizens of this country, it's a role model. The kind of election systems we have, I have personal experience of visiting various institutions where the representative of the various countries come to understand how to conduct elections. people come from the developed countries and to a so-called developing country of India, which people say, though I don't agree to that, to learn from the developed countries that how we have to make people empowered through the Right to Information Act as you have. So there will be an accountability and participative management. So I think this is one of the major landmark reform which we have, which is very important. Second point, as a lawyer, I see when a state start responding to the things which are not visible, the way we have responded to the intellectual property rights in last few years, and we have got a lot of confidence of the international community that this country not only protects the expression but also the ideas. And third, which is very important, if we talk about the contribution of this government, we say overnight this new law is coming, digital system is coming, the cash is going out of economy, cities are going for this, the reservation is coming for so many people, disabled people are coming. But we must understand that this government has taken up the regime when we have to meet 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. What is happening today at the ground level, whatever the laws and regulations are coming, it's not coming out of a blue. It's not an overnight dream. Actually, which we have signed in last 10 years and which we have to receive and which we have to achieve by 2030, that's why the different laws are coming up. A country which is concerned for the uniform taxation system in the form of a GST, the legal regime of appointing a fast redressal system, new tribunals, Person with Disabilities Act. I think this is remarkable when the countries start looking and bringing the people, those who are disabled, they are special, and bringing them into the mainstream of the society. I think these are the reforms which are worth appreciating and look into and give a lot of positive sense to move forward.
Mr. Singh, in 1962, many say, and in fact it's documented as well, that we lost the war with China because one, we did not have the right equipment, our forces did not have the right training, there were issues about resources. In 2021, I think the perception has changed, as you rightly pointed out. But we're also realizing that defense today functions in a very different realm. For example, a lot of warfare is happening in information. We also know that warfare is also being conducted through, for example, cryptocurrency. We also know that warfare today means the narrative warfare. So warfare has changed. The whole idea of defense has changed. Even as there is a conventional, we had a conventional skirmish with the Chinese on the LAC in Ladakh last year. And at the same time, we have been facing cross-border terrorism, which is again asymmetric warfare in Kashmir and other parts of the country in the last 30 years. So my question to you is, even as you rightly pointed out, our armed forces have grown, we now have equipment, we have a lot of resources, unlike what our situation was in 1962. But the issue today is that the armed forces are now worried about drone attacks. They are now worried about drones taking control. For a long time, we were thinking of drones as instruments which would be used to do shopping and to, for picking up stuff from one location to another. But today, drone is a weapon of war. Are we ready for that battle? Are we ready for the new ways and means of warfare?
Defense or security will always remain a game of cat and mouse. So technology will evolve, and the next day the same technology will become redundant or obsolete. India has always been catching up with these things. Let's say low intensity conflict, which you talked about, cross-border terrorism or asymmetric warfare. These were the concepts we have worked upon since last 20 years, and armies from the developed world, they come and train with us to understand the concepts. Very important point which you have picked up is actually the war is changing. There will be situation which is also studied as no war, no peace concept. So there won't be war, but there won't be any peace. And also it will be a amalgamation of a mix of so many wars at various strata, which is also termed as hybrid warfare. So, there was a news which talked about Chinese trying to ingress into your power grid in Mumbai. So having understood all these things and thinking about the future or or the concepts of planning and perspectives, Indian Army, which started in 2019 with a major change, they came out with a concept which was waiting since last almost 40 years, CDS, Chief of Defence Staff. Now with CDS, we don't have to agreeing to CDS or just starting that organization is not everything. With that have come lots of other organizations like AFSOD, Armed Forces Special Operations Division. So let's say tomorrow if you require out of area contingency, you will be prepared for that. Also, cybersecurity cell is there, which is still picking up. The other major part, which you right in the beginning of the program you talked about, is self-reliance. Now, the technologies, hybrid technologies, your Ministry of Defense has started roping in engineers from IITs. They have started roping in the private industries. It's a major change actually. You have to give the responsibilities to the industry of your own country. Your strategic relevance, number one, or strategic independence will always depend only if you are able to fight your war with your own weapons. And that's what we are looking at. So nobody would have thought like LCA Tejas, which will be advanced version of Tejas. Nobody thought like 118 Arjun advanced version of tanks will be buying. We have number of versions of helicopters, light combat helicopter, advanced light helicopters. So we have picked up in so many ways. It will be always a mix of conventional things and non-conventional, sub-conventional or high-end technology things. War will be like that only. We are doing quite well, and we in next 5 years, because we have set up lots of structures, Army Design Bureau, the Department of Naval Design, I mean, they are doing their own work in consonance with the technological institutions like IITs. So next 4-5 years are going to be very crucial for us. We are also doing lots of joint venture things. One of the biggest, like let's say we talk of bigger infrastructure development or equipment or systems development, indigenous aircraft carrier is one of the milestones which is going to put you into the league. Similarly, submarine, which is a nuclear run, is another milestone. So we are picking up in so many ways, all on conventional, sub-conventional and in high-tech ends.
So if I would ask you briefly, what are the milestones in the last 74 years in defense?
The biggest thing has been the approval of CDS post, then having your own aircraft, which we will be fighting with war with. In army, you will be having your own tanks. And apart from that...
But these milestones seem to be happening right now. In fact, you cannot really say that these happened in the last 74 years. Are there any milestones in defense which we can say or celebrate as milestones?
1971 war is the biggest milestone actually. Surgical strike.
So you're essentially saying that most defense-related milestones happened in the last few years, and 1971 was still the basic and probably the first milestone in India's defense history. That's a very insightful thing. Now, Professor Dabhade, I'm going to ask you very briefly that you listed out several milestones as a nation which is interested in engaging with the rest of the world, which is a believer in globalization, but at the same time, as Prime Minister Modi said and laid out the vision for this nation for next quarter, and he did say that at the 100th year of our Independence Day, we should be a self-reliant nation. How do you see this nation reconciling and basically walking through this maze of geopolitical equations and relationships across the world while being self-reliant, while being Atmanirbhar? Do you think there is a possibility of reconciliation between globalization and self-reliance?
The concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat is not a limiting concept. It is not that you are closing your doors and windows and home and your own house. It came, this concept came in a very specific context of the COVID corona crisis, which the pandemic, which the entire world is seeing. So it is really about building resilient supply chains. What essentially we saw during this period was a sort of weaponization of economic interdependence by principally China. So the only way out of this conundrum was to really focus on getting the basics right. Obviously vocal for local, but obviously that we don't have to be dependent on at least a singular country for our basic necessities in terms of either technologies or in terms of material resources. Because what we also saw in recent years was that, for example, take the example of Japan or South Korea or even Australia, they were feeling the brunt of the over dependence on a particular country, and that, I think, those experiences have shaped the Indian narrative on Atmanirbhar Bharat. And India right now is very clear about its strategic priorities, and we heard in defense, we heard also in the domain of business that India is now talking about its goals, about India at 100, and India is very clear that there are a specific set of challenges externally, and India needs to be very clear where its friends are, and exactly as you pointed out, where who are its enemies and who are the frenemies. And rather than locking ourselves with a group of nations, I think at some level India is now talking about coalition, different multi-alignment. If there is, for example, if you want to deal with the problem of China, please, you have the Quad in place. If you have to deal with the other, for example, on the question of terrorism, you have another coalition in place. So India is now very clear that ultimately it is going to be your goals that will decide what instruments you are using, and there are going to be multiple instruments. For example, in Afghanistan, if US is not a partner, so let's try Russia, let's try Iran. So I think India is now, in that sense, you're talking about strategic autonomy, but the power which India has built, especially after 1991 reforms, I think is giving India that confidence, and its leadership, talking about political will, the leadership now has that political will to assert itself internationally and be an example of sorts in terms of conducting itself internationally, either in corona in the corona crisis period or even later. I think that was beautifully mentioned by Prime Minister Modi on 15th of August.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up this discussion on this note, but I want to add a few more things. The thing that we did not discuss in this panel was our social progress, where we have advanced socially and where we are headed in the next 25 years. If you look at the last 74 years, where we have gone right and where we have really made progress is the empowerment of women. It is also the fight against diseases. It's also against the fight against poverty and illiteracy. We are today a confident nation. We have worked not only in terms of economy or military or defense or diplomacy, but we have also tried to evolve as a society which is invested in progressive values, which is invested in pluralistic ideas, which is also a believer and also a practitioner of diversity and unity in diversity, which are the fundamentals of this nation and our nation building, which are also the fundamentals of our philosophical outlook as a nation with 5,000 years old history and civilization. India has moved ahead. India is, as Professor Dabhade also pointed out, that we firmly stand with democracies in the world today. Our democracy is celebrated not only in India but across the world. We remain a firm believer also in institutions. We believe in strengthening this nation through the law and through proper course of a law within our institutions and within the constitutional framework. It is possible to have both globalization and self-reliance for the next quarter ahead of us. And on 100th Independence Day, we would be flying high. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Milestone 75. You just heard this discussion in the National Program of Talks. The participants were Dr. Manish Dabhade, Assistant Professor, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi; Mayank Singh, Defense Correspondent; and Dr. Harsh Pathak, Advocate, Supreme Court of India. Senior journalist Aarti Tickoo Singh moderated the discussion. Produced by Nitish Arora, this broadcast came to you from the Delhi studios of All India Radio.